Hi, Bo here. So I finally sorta honed in on one specific thing to do a video about. Um, it's a little bit, kind of last minute, more recent, just 'cause what I mean is, like, I had this long list that's like, I've been accumulating a list of topics for like the last 2 weeks or so, and then this thing came to my attention more recently, and it's this tweet that I read on Twitter. Where else? Well, sometimes people screenshot tweets and put them on other social media sites, but yeah, so I read this directly on Twitter. I go on these long jags of not using Twitter, and then it'll call me back for whatever reason, and I guess more recently I've been on it. But yeah, my pattern is like months without, then checking in, and then being on it for like days, for consecutive days, and then another month or so without. And but yeah, right now I'm in a very much on it phase, and it's like it's where I get to see news about the two things that I guess I care about most, which are really kind of the same thing, which is misogyny. I mean, umbrella-ing it's misogyny. So it's women's rights and trans ideology negatively impacting women's rights and girls' rights, and Meghan Markle hate. Those are like the two things that I'm like, ugh. They drive me to unprecedented levels of annoyance and anger at times. It's so frustrating being in either argument with a royalist or with a trans ideologue or trans ideology extremist, as I've heard King Critical call them. And yeah, it's weirdly, they're like the same kind of person, even though they're sort of opposed. But that's not what this video is about. So Twitter, though, Twitter is it's an interesting place because it can be really, well, for me it can be really frustrating, as this thread that I'm going to read through and reply to now will demonstrate, but it can be kind of inspiring too, because I see how the number of, like, quote-unquote TERFs have grown. But anyway, so being on Twitter, I can't remember exactly how I got here, but at some point in my scrolling, oh no, I do remember, someone retweeted this, and they retweeted it with a response, someone I follow, and like, my pattern on Twitter is I follow literally every single gender critical seeming person, and sometimes that backfires because, like, they seem cool and then they'll say something like racist, and I'm like, oh, must unfollow you. But mostly it's worked out. So while scrolling through my Twitter feed, someone retweeted a random user who, well, I can just say goes by the name MillieCorner, and reply tweeted it saying, me thinks this person is lying, something like that. And so that, you know, caught my interest, and I went and I read this long thread by this Millie person, who I think is British, and I'm pretty sure she says something to give that away, that she's English. I can't remember it now. I read through it once, and I don't exactly remember the details. Also, Millie feels like a very British name, but anyway, that's not even relevant, or it's not that relevant, but yeah, so I went and I read through this multi-part tweet, and I just, I just thought, I should respond to this. It's like, it was posted on March 23rd, and it does have some things about it that are suspicious. I mean, it could be real, it could be a real account, it could be, but I can't help but have a little tinfoil hat moment and wonder about the authenticity of its rise to prominence. And I guess that does happen, where people can just go viral unexpectedly, but it seems like usually that happens with people who have some level of a fan base, and then it's like the snowball effect of fans retweet it, and then it like grows legs. But this is like, this woman, she claims to have made her Twitter account just for this. I don't know. All I do know is that I read MillieCorner's tweet thread, and I thought, okay, maybe this is what I will respond to next, and here we are. This is what I'm responding to next. So I'm just gonna like go through and read it without responding first, and then I think I'll come back and respond where I see fit. So this is Millie. God help me, but I've made a Twitter because I can't deal with quote-unquote TERFs and their ilk for another minute. My daughter has happily lived her life as trans for years. At first I felt so relieved seeing her finally at peace. In the last year, I do not recognize the same person. I did not notice, but I learned she was avoiding public bathrooms, running straight to the toilet after a car journey, shopping trip, university. When I notice and ask why, English is not perfect here, but I know that's just Twitter. It doesn't lend sometimes because you're so cautious about space, character space. But okay, back to what she was saying. When I notice and ask why, When I notice and ask why she's scared of being quote-unquote clocked and confronted by quote-unquote TERFs, she is going hours at university without peeing. My daughter is in her second to last year of studying medicine. She has a smaller frame than her cisgender sister and refuses to join any sports clubs out of fear of being confronted and harassed. She fears meeting someone in a club and having to out herself or being accused of deception. I watch her neglect her studies and scroll through social media where I find grown women my age telling her she is a fetishist, a pervert, a creep. It devastates me. Nobody knows of her trans status, and nobody ever will. She is utterly ashamed of herself. I now have to watch my daughter, after years of misery and a brief period of freedom, endure the same things other minorities like gay people endured in the 1980s. Turn off your phone, I've told her, as any mother would. She says it's bigger than that, and it is. These people are in Parliament. There's the British. Sorry. Okay. These people are in Parliament and the Lords. They are influencing legislation. Parents of trans children are being charged in Texas. The misinformation and smearing of the trans community has gone on long enough. I refuse to lose my daughter over the sake of middle-aged women who need to have pissing contests over who is the most oppressed while spinning blatant lies about people like my daughter. So I hope this attracts quote-unquote TERFs. I would like them to explain to me in detail the changes that self-ID laws will have to everyday life. That's what it was about, wasn't it? Self-ID? The government made it cheaper. It's hardly an overwhelming reform, but it's not self-ID. It's every place where trans people live publicly and openly. You are no different to the homophobic bullies of years gone by. Picking a new acceptable target and pulling the ladder up behind you. While I do not stand with you, with J.K. Rowling, with anyone associated with the TERF campaign against innocent trans people, I will stand with my daughter until my dying breath. And whilst I'm at it, I refuse to be lectured as a nurse on biology. Does sex exist? Of course it does. What do you think she transitioned? I've never seen my chromosomes. I don't care to. Is an adoptive parent no longer entitled to the rights of other parents? These arguments are a waste of intellect. I saw a lesbian quote-unquote TERF argue about how trans women choose to be women whilst girls are forced into child marriage. So, by the same token, by campaigning for gay marriage, you were choosing to be married when these girls were forced? At first, I understood the reasonable concerns, the quote-unquote reasonable concerns, and for that I will never forgive myself. I'm a woman. I didn't want me or my daughters harmed. But I learned, I listened. You give an inch, these people take a mile. They want trans elimination from society. And truly, my heart goes out to these people who detransition. I can't imagine. But I don't know another area of medicine where a small percentage of unsuccessful cases calls for a review or something with such a high success rate. Probably meant of something with such a high success rate. I really don't. I understand that this is complicated, and maybe we do need to improve the services so this doesn't happen to people. I'm hardly worshipping the NHS. Well, that's the real British indicator. I'm hardly worshipping the NHS gender clinics at an altar. Quite the opposite. These clinics should be ashamed of themselves. 4 to 6 year wait for a first appointment. Imagine that in another area of medicine. Asking my daughter if she wanted to reconsider her name because it was gender neutral. Asking with little to no sensitivity if she had ever been molested. What she thought about anal sex. All of this was written in a report and passed amongst her doctors. I, for one, would not want my GP to see details of my sex life, would you? What if you had to, or else you would be dropped from the service? You are accessing to try and save your own life. That's what she had to do. Okay, right. So that was the last tweet in this multi-part tweet, and my overall impression is I just get the sense that this was something that this might not be authentic, and I mean I will discuss it like it is, but part of my issue is that it seems constructed to manipulate people emotionally and to create a sort of hate base and sort of hate mob, witch hunt type of thing against specifically the specifically named woman, J.K. Rowling, and then women in general who think that there should be name and category distinctions between the sexes, who people she would call TERFs, who are overwhelmingly women. So I don't like that part. I think that it's very manipulative. Even if it is authentic, it's manipulative. It's scary. It's scary. I'm like trying to figure out how I would classify it and what's wrong with it. And I know they would just say, oh, well, we're the scared ones. Rowling is so rich, and that's scary. She has power. We don't. But, like, it's just doing this whipping up of emotions thing that seems to always precede people's violent actions. It's this thing people do, especially with women, where they turn you into something. I mean, actually, they do this with everyone. This one, I'll say, is not just women. In modern times, it does seem to more disproportionately happen to women, but historically, they do this with every group. People, the manipulators, propagandists, they do this with every group, where they try to make them seem some version of subhuman to justify cruel treatment. So, like, if you keep putting in people's heads, Rowling is evil, Rowling is a bad person, then what if someone harms her? They're going to be like, oh, well, it was justified, because remember how evil she is? Remember how evil and cruel and, racist she is? Because that's apparently the new narrative they're trying to throw on her, or the new label. But I won't get into that. But it is part of this. It's relevant because it's like this thing, and this is the parallel with Meghan Markle that I can't, even though I think they're kind of opposed, but not really. It's, things aren't so black and white as that, but I do think they're kind of opposed on this issue. But it's the same pattern of vilifying a woman and hating her disproportionately, and they do use the same tactics where they like try to reframe her as evil, like not just misguided, but evil. Meghan Markle is not just annoying. She's evil. She's this manipulator of Prince Harry, and J.K. Rowling is not just misguided. She's evil for thinking that women need separate spaces. She's the most extreme version of bad, and they do that. I suspect that's what the pattern in history seems to be, to justify cruel treatment of this person. The cruel treatment that they intend to enact on this person, and maybe, wink wink, rile others into enacting on this person. So I think very manipulative, very misogynistic in nature, but let me actually respond to the tweets I wanted to respond to in this multi-parter. Okay, so first thing I wanted to respond to is the second tweet, and that's like probably the last one I'll be able to count, because okay, so it says, I did not notice, but I learned she was avoiding public bathrooms, running straight to the toilet after a car journey, shopping trip, university. When I notice and ask why, she's scared of being clocked and confronted by TERFs. She is going hours at university without peeing. So the thing is here that a male person should not be using a female restroom. I mean, I would, in this theoretical scenario where there is a trans-identified male who needs to go to the restroom and in public, outside when they're away from their home, you should use the restroom that corresponds with your sex, although I know people are gonna do what they're gonna do. But you know, you should, I think that you've done if this is real, I think to this mother, she has done her child a disservice, and it's amazing to me that she doesn't understand or doesn't feel something is more wrong than what even she understands when her kid cannot accept their sex, because trans identified people and their allies will say, you know, sex is different from gender. Okay, so then why can't you accept that bathrooms are separated by sex and then go in the one that corresponds with your sex? You know, it's not addressing the real issue, and you should detect that as this person's mother, that your kid is so unable to acknowledge what sex they are, that they deny it to this level where they won't go into a bathroom that acknowledges that. You don't, I mean, okay, actually, I will say it is rational for a trans-identified male who looks like in between sexes, who looks perhaps intersex, who looks even female passing. It can be dangerous to go into that restroom, the male restroom, but I mean, that's where we as a society need to shift culturally in how we raise males, and this would have been the perfect opportunity to demand that of men, to demand that drastic socialization reforms in boys and men. But instead of doing that, we're doing this other thing of making the female space the safe space by compromising its safety by letting males in there too, which is extremely backwards and unproductive and doesn't change or help society on the large scale, does it? You know, it doesn't change the big problem of the negative parts of male socialization. Part of the reason I think that most trans-identified people would, or specifically males, would cite for not wanting to go in the men's restroom is the safety risk they're confronted with. And it's just, and then when we get here, it's just like it's the same thing that the care about rape victims versus false rape accusation victims reveals. I hope I said that correctly. Let me explain why this is connected, because both of these things reveal the misogyny inherent in society, where when we are really logical here and consider what is most often happening in the world, more often than not, males who rape females or anyone, they're not being prosecuted, they're not getting in trouble, they're not even being reported most of the time. So what's happening in society is more men who have sexually abused someone are walking free in the world than there are males who have been convicted of that crime. Right? Like, just statistically looking at the numbers of report, looking at the number or versus the numbers of, even when you do report prosecution, like getting an actual conviction, it's like 18%. It's like an 18% conviction rate. So of the few who even report it, there's a very low conviction rate. So the reality is that most males who do that crime are free. They're just out here among us. And that doesn't anger people or scare people the way the very idea of a guy being falsely accused and imprisoned enrages and terrifies people. And I think that's like, cause then it's like the thing you're confronted with is what bothers you more, a man being falsely accused or a man running the streets who's done that kind of crime. And I think most people subconsciously and some very consciously will just admit the man being in trouble, being falsely accused, makes them angrier and feel more passionate about fighting it than the girls of the world being, at risk or vulnerable, or even the boys of the world being at risk and more vulnerable. Because I think it reveals that people care more about men. Men care more about men. Women seem to care more about men. And people are generally quite misogynistic, and that's what this reveals, where you are people on this side, the left side, they care more about men who are afraid of men than women who are afraid of, we'll just say, males. Males having to share a bathroom with males, and their fear over that is more honored and taken more seriously than women fearing having to share, or females will say, keep it sex terms, females having to share a bathroom and space with males. That's not as cared about, it's not as honored, because misogyny, because subconsciously, again, most people care more about what males feel and how males hurt and how things will harm males, which is, I know it doesn't maybe feel like that, but that's what is true for most people. Like when Kavanaugh was up for becoming the SCOTUS, the next SCOTUS, I remember around that time, because he was, being accused of this, sexual assault crime from his youth, and overwhelmingly the sentiment was, I'm so afraid for my sons. I can't even count how many times I heard that or read that. I think one of Donald Trump's sons even said that, I'm so afraid for my sons. And that's not logical, because your daughter is much more likely to be sexually assaulted and never get a conviction than your son is to be falsely accused and be convicted after the false accusation. That's a lot less likely to happen in a lifetime, in your lifetime. And yet, so many people are like, I'm so afraid for my sons, because people care more about boys and male feelings than they do about girls and female safety. I mean, at least now they do. Maybe there was a time where it was a no-brainer. I mean, it seems like there was a time where separating males from females was a no-brainer, and they did prioritize keeping girls safe in that way. But there's definitely a hostility that's grown for women and girls over like the last couple of decades that makes people just kind of all, the left, the right, the in-betweens, the libertarians, they all kind of low-key, high-key hate women and their complaining and their endless wants of equality and such, and liberation and things. So all of that was a response to that one. I don't even think I fully said everything I wanted to say. It's like I don't even know how rational of a fear it is, especially if this mother says that this child of hers is like female passing, or she implies that this boy, young man, is female passing because she says no one will ever know she's trans, and she makes a point of saying she's smaller than her cisgender sister. That feels like bullshit, but I mean, that feels like part of the narrative, the lie, like this young man, this trans girl is so meek and tiny and dainty and all the things you say that a man or a male person or a trans woman could never be, but she is all of those things, and you're still persecuting her. Look at how evil the TERFs and J.K. Rowling are. And it feels like bullshit, because overwhelmingly males are very clockable as males. Like, and they should be, I mean, not even should, it's not about should, it's just what it is. It's just how humans are. We overwhelmingly can distinguish the sexes, you know, even if you change how they're dressed and how they style their hair. Male traits are just very prominent, and usually female traits are too. And but whatever, the point is that yeah, getting clocked as your actual sex is possible, but even if you did, I really don't think women, and that's so weird to me that this person would specifically be afraid of TERFs, not just women clocking you, but TERFs clocking you. That's, you think TERFs are like, you like, overwhelmingly it seems, maybe I'm wrong, it seems most women, even if they were a TERF, like, I feel like I wouldn't say anything if I saw someone who I clocked as male in the bathroom. I'm gonna confront them? I'm gonna try to fight a man in the bathroom? Are you kidding me? I don't think most women would do that, however you identify them, however they identify themselves regarding TRA or TERF, that is. That's just such a, you know, speaking of irrational fears, that's very unlikely to happen. Like, you have the upper hand socially, and in most cases physiologically here, so it's very unlikely that a woman, however you identify her, as a TERF, as an ally, that she would say something to you in a bathroom. Like, what? I mean, maybe if there was a group of them and it was just this obvious man, but it's just so unlikely, especially at a university campus. Like, this is why the story seems so fake, because universities are like bastions of like TRA love and embrace. So this idea that like, I feel like if a woman tried to call out a trans-identified male, she would be the one who got attacked on a university campus. But I don't know. Okay. The other thing I wanted to respond to, I did touch on her cisgender sister is smaller than her, like, manipulative talk that feels so fake. But like, even if her, I don't, and I wonder what smaller mean. Oh, smaller frame. So even so, like, it is kind of rare, but there are males who are smaller frame than females, males who are of a smaller, I guess, in the same family. That's odd, but it's not impossible, but it seems odd. Because I was thinking maybe the mom meant smaller as in like weight, like, because certainly there are women who are heavier than men, but yeah, but she specifically said frame. That feels very much like a lie, but it could be true, and either way, yeah, your quote unquote daughter, your male child, does not belong in female sports, because that's what it says here. Sister, smaller frame than her cisgender sister, and refuses to join any sports. He shouldn't join any sports or clubs. I don't know. I mean, I guess if it's a female exclusive club, yeah, he shouldn't join them. He shouldn't, and you should have been a better mother and taught him he could be proudly GNC, and that not everything is for him. And you even in the world where that's like almost my utopia, there still seems to be a better way than what TRAs are doing with regards to how they're advocating raising trans-identified children, where even if I were like, okay, you're my trans daughter, but I'm gonna still teach you not everything is for you. There are times and places where cisgender girls need to meet up, and there are times and places and spaces where cisgender girls need to be alone and separated. You're like, you are trans and they are cis, and you know, that doesn't make you lesser, it just makes you different. Just like men are different from women, we're all different from each other, and that doesn't make you inferior. It's just different. People, and like, I think instinctively people would accept that, but trans identified children are being like, they themselves are manipulated and socialized to like complain when they don't get their way. They're like being socialized to like threaten the big S when they don't get their way. Like, 'cause this was not a thing 5-6+ years ago. There weren't these children of any age making demands to be acknowledged as the opposite sex, or they would end themselves. But now it's like part of what they learn is normal. Like, they learn that S is part of how they cope, quote unquote cope, if they don't get their way. It's how they deal with not getting their way, is this extreme thing. This is such a clear case of child abuse by the medical community. So yeah, I think if they were socialized to understand, just like boys and girls understand, oh, the boys' restroom is for the boys, the girls' restroom is for the girls, and it doesn't bug them at all, really. And I think if you, from young age, if you taught, even like, again, my almost utopia, where it didn't quite get my way, but you know, we could just, everyone has separate spaces, because my utopia, well, my almost utopia is they would acknowledge what they are, and they would just call themselves what they are. Like ContraPoints would say, yeah, I'm a man, but this is how I prefer to express, and like it or not, this is what I'm gonna be, but I am a man with HRT, and this is how I cope with existence, and this is what works for me. But I'm a man doing that, and I don't deny that part at all. And then my like almost utopia is where at least ContraPoints types would say, I'm not going to call myself a man, but I am something different from a cis woman. And so I think trans women like me need our own spaces. And then they did that. Like, I think I would fight with that. I would fight with them if that were their goal. Like, separate spaces for trans women, separate spaces for trans men. That I could work with. But they don't want that, because that's not validating. And I think if kids were socialized with, okay, there's boys, there's girls, there's trans boys, there's trans girls, that wouldn't even be a frustration. They would just be like, okay, yeah, we're different, but we still hang together and play together. But again, they're socialized to be so entitled, and I really hesitate to use this word, but it genuinely is. It does seem to be a type of narcissism. It's so crazy, the self-centeredness of trans ideology. So the next tweet I wanted to respond to is where the mother says they find their trans daughter scrolling social media and interacting with grown women that are the mother's age, telling the daughter that she's a fetishist and pervert and creep. And that just, I mean, I guess kids will show their parents the details of where they've been online. It's not impossible, but again, this feels like more BS. But let's say it's real, and then my response to that is, what gender critical people are saying is so varied. And in my experience, as someone who just follows them all, it's overwhelmingly like you have to learn to accept what you are kind of rhetoric. Why? So it's like, where I would love to see where this supposed daughter went, where they only experience people calling them a fetishist and a pervert and a creep, because there's usually, in my experience, always a lot of gender crits are talking about self-acceptance and learning to cope with dysphoria in healthy ways instead of, messing with your perfectly healthy, beautiful body, whether it's a male body or a female body. And so I find this to be suspicious, to say the least. It's very uncharitable, obviously, because this is not the only thing that gender critical people say. There are the ones who say stuff like you're a perv, you're a fetishist, you're a creep, because, well, they get angry. They get to that point where they've had it with with the entitlements of male people. Because I was just going through my feed where I follow like almost 1,000 people, most of whom are gender critical people, and it's overwhelmingly the self-loving guru type of gender critical people. It's the loving advice and the empathetic gender critical people, some of whom used to identify as trans themselves, some of whom to this day experience dysphoria about their sex. And so this is just not honest. If you're in a truly diverse space like Twitter of diverse gender critical opinions, you would be getting diverse gender critical opinions, and it is not overwhelmingly meanies saying you're a creep. And then there was the tweet comparing this trans-identified male to gay people. No, your son trying to hide in the female category and put female labels on himself because he's a GNC male is not the same at all as what gay people experienced in the 1980s. He is being told a fact about his biology, which is that he's a male, and for humans that means he's a man. You're not going to ever just get away with saying that a trans-identified male is being oppressed when females or anyone acknowledges his maleness. You're not going to liken that to being gay or black, as you more often like to compare, and just get away with that, because it's not the same at all. It's not even remotely similar. So when this mother says, I refuse to lose my daughter over the sake of middle-aged women who need to have pissing contests, it's a very male thing, by the way. I mean, a woman, God, middle-aged women saying that a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and these words should be rooted in biology, is not a pissing contest about oppression. It's acknowledgement of his history and the reality of women needing spaces separate from men. That's not any kind of pissing contest, and even what you're demanding is, I don't know, this, because like this person is not even arguing about their child not being allowed in bathrooms. They're just upset that everyone isn't playing along, or it seems the like unspoken bit here seems to be that they're upset that everyone isn't being forced to play along, that there isn't something more serious happening to those who refuse to agree that a male person is female if they say it in their heart, or if they say it with all their heart, or feel it in their heart, or feel it in their head. This is really sinister. It's really manipulative. And then this, I didn't even finish the sentence, and who is the most oppressed while spinning blatant lies about people like my daughter. Like, what blatant lies? Because there is a high percentage of people who identify, of males who identify as female, who are totally fulfilling the AGP model. They totally get off on being viewed as female because to them a female human is a very sexual creature and thing, and it's like a turn on to them to be female, to be oppressed, to be like dominated physically. To all of that to them is likened to femaleness, and all of that to them is like hot. It gets them off. Like, they've said this. There's so many trans-identified males who have discussed this at length, how sexualized they feel by getting to wear certain quote-unquote female clothes, and the creepy things they do on TikTok and Instagram, and the posts they make, and like masturbating in women's restrooms. And it's obviously not all trans identified males doing this, but it's enough of them. Like, obviously not all men are sexual deviants, but a lot of them are, and a lot of them are sexual deviants unapologetically, and that applies to trans-identified males as well. It's like male-identified male, trans-identified male. There is a pattern here of, I don't really love the word sexual deviance. It's too judgmental, but it's also accurate. So it's a thing. There are patterns of male sexualization of women, of female people, of everything. Like, men routinely pornify everything. It says in my, was it the last video? I think it was the video that was a response to for Harriet. That thing of men do, like having a rule, I think 34, like everything is porn rule, or whatever you can think of, it's a porn. That's a man rule. That's literally a man-made rule, because men do that. They pornify everything. Their appetite for sexual, for lack of a better term, corruption and corrupting things, like everything from the gross ways they talked about Greta, what's-her-face, the environmentalist activist who was like 16 when she came on the scene. The way they do those countdowns for girls turning 18, like they recently did with Millie Bobby Brown, and she was talking about that in an interview recently. Like, men have these patterns, and like I feel like in 2015 women were starting to openly talk about and criticize them. I feel like even specifically Jamila Jamil, I think that's how you say her name, was talking about these male patterns of perversion and violence. And then like the trans thing like smacked every lefty over the head, and they just stopped naming male perversion and the patterns of male violence. And now, I mean, some will just say, oh, it's just cis men. Like, that makes sense. Like, only, like, what's the logic there, please? Why are cis men more prone to X, Y, and Z in your head? Why do you think that? Why do you think trans-identified males who you would call trans women don't have those patterns? Please tell me. Ugh. And something else I wanted to say. Your kid, Millie's kid, thinking that the only options for them are validation or death. Insane. Like, how can you know this and think this is, or accept that this is how your child thinks, and not think that there is something deeply wrong? Because, like, that's not a thing with anything. Because later you say, like, I don't know, any medical study where a few bad cases make the whole study whatever. Like, I don't know of any treatment for anything ever where it requires 100% of people to validate it to work. Like, what? Like, that's never gonna happen unless, again, you're like implicitly imposing some sort of fascist regime that enforces people to you know, share a specific thought and not be allowed to say certain things publicly, because like it like people are always going to acknowledge there, or I should say there are always going to be people who understand that men are men and men are male and women are women and women are female, and it's like innate. It's not even like I'm seeing, like, kids just innately know, and they're even very honest about distinguishing males from females. They're like so honest they're rude about it, to be honest. But yeah, it's this, you're like fighting nature in a very, I mean, this couldn't be more of a fight against nature. Injecting your body with HRT, cutting off your breast, inverting your penis, this is like an insane way to fight nature, and it's an insane thing to do. And I'm sorry that language is insensitive, but it's true too. Like, and this is being said out of frustration. It's just, this is such an obviously bad coping mechanism. Like, and where you're even saying like your kid is like on the verge of being lost because your kid has discovered that there are people who do not agree that a male thinking they are female makes them female, and you think that the problem is the females who are saying that, not something deeper with your kid. I think if you're real, you're a very bad mother. And I would have like, but you're an adult, so I would have some like empathy for you, because I mean, even if you're not real, you represent mothers who are going through versions of this, and it's like, but you're the adult here, and I know you too are brainwashed with sexist roles, and you know, you would rather have a kid who is, at first glance, you know, they look like they're dressed in quote-unquote girls' clothes, so let them just call themselves a girl, and that to you is easier than having to explain or correct people who are like, oh, your daughter? And then you're like, no, that's my son with the wig and the, or long hair, maybe not a wig, and makeup and looking so pretty. Yeah, that's my son. So I think you've done your kid a real disservice. I think you didn't do the wise motherly thing. I think you did something slightly selfish, and I think you did something very unwise and mean by not preparing your kid for, at minimum, preparing them for dissent, preparing them, and like, it's such an easy concept to understand. It shouldn't be sending a kid through like mental turmoil to just to know, yeah, in our world, honey, people think that being a man is defined as being a male, which you technically are, so that's just the name they'll call you, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't change that I love you. Like, you could say that to your kid, your supposed kid, and you could like have put that in their head, but they're like losing their minds and not wanting to be here because every last person isn't going to agree that they are a woman. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, because that's not everyone's responsibility. It's no one's responsibility to lie to your kid, and you shouldn't have done that. And even in my almost utopia, what you did is still wrong. Even in my almost utopia, where trans people get to just be, and they're called trans, and even they're called like my almost utopia, your daughter would be acknowledged as your daughter, but your trans daughter, she still would need to understand that the facts of life, and or that she's a male, that the type of human she is categorized is just called male in our language. That's it. It's not a hateful thing. It's just reality, and it doesn't change anything about her human worth, or that she gets to even call herself she. Like, even how you TRAs do trans is wrong. And then the stuff about self-ID, I mean, obviously that's a problem. Obviously, when you have two distinct groups of humans, male and female, and now you're saying that the males who are historically and statistically the greater threat to the female sex can just call themselves females and then be right in there next to them in their intimate spaces. Of course that's a problem. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Obviously that's a problem. And I'm not a middle-aged woman. I don't need to be an older woman to understand that. That obviously has a lot of flaws. That's a very flawed system, and they didn't, I mean, I would imagine gender critical people, or the people you call TERFs, didn't want any version of self-ID. So this thing about it in England, I guess, being the reform making it cheaper or easier to access, is it's even worse. It's just a bad thing made worse is the issue, because it never should have been. You should never have been able to identify yourself as the opposite sex of what you are. That's obviously very bad and very nonsensical. Like, it's you, like the thing she said earlier about a pissing contest for who's more impressed. That's like, that feels like such a male thing to say. That's why I feel like this person is male. It's like, it's such an undermining of the actual horrors that women have faced throughout the centuries and to this day at the hands of men. Like you don't, how could a woman, I mean, to be fair, there are plenty of traitorous women, but it's just individually, because of the context of this feels so much like a man wrote it. It's just like, it's hard to believe that a mother would not be able to understand why female people need separate spaces sometimes, and how self-ID could be a problem, and why it's kind of, it doesn't make sense. It's not based in any kind of objective reality. Like, what is the basis for this being okay? Because then it's very selfish if you're a trans-identified male, or if you're the mother of a trans-identified child. This is your freaking you're Petunia Dursley here. You're Petunia. You're just like prioritizing whatever my little boy wants, he gets. Fuck all you TERFs, you stupid bitches. Like, that's the vibe that a lot of these that a lot of these parents of trans-identified kids give. It's very, you want to talk about selfish. This is selfish and illogical and irrational. How could you ever justify men being allowed to just call themselves women? How is that reasonable? Why would that need to happen? Why can't a trans-identified person, even authentically dysphoric trans-identified people, just accept their sex and then live life accordingly? Go into spaces where mixed sex is okay and makes sense, and not go into spaces where mixed sex is not okay, or go into the space that is for their sex. Why is that not good? Why is the way it was not okay? What's your argument against that? Because it doesn't make your little baby happy? Because your kid's gonna have a tantrum, threaten to S? This is giving into someone who is very self-centered with very poor emotional maturity. So I mean, that tied into the next part of this inanely stupid tweet, where that ends. You are no different to the homophobic bullies of years gone by, picking a new acceptable target and pulling the ladder up behind you. Oh my god. Targeting them how? What the okay, calm down. What are you talking about? Wanting to keep female spaces exclusive to females is not targeting or bullying anyone. It is preserving the need for female spaces, for women and girls spaces. There's a logical need for those things. There always has been. In a free society where women are actually allowed to go outside, there need to be spaces for women and girls to congregate away from men and boys. Picking a new acceptable target. This is the willful obtuseness I'm talking about. This feels so fucking manipulative. You know that's not what's happening. J.K. Rowling is not, and all the turfin people, using Karen's word, all the turfin, they're not. Karen is so you're kidding me, right? I think that's her name, her username. All these people, all these women, and the few men who are allied with them, they're not picking on you. They're not picking on trans-identified people. They're not trying to target or hurt you when they say women need a name. XX humans need a name. Female people need space in the world for just them sometimes. This is not picking on you. This is crazy and extremely dangerous that this even works, that you can just say bullshit in this, like, this just lies, and this manipulative, using this manipulative language to turn, like, to women who are saying something so reasonable into the bad guys, the villains who deserve harm implicitly, who deserve at minimum to be hated and considered evil. What are you talking about, though? How is Rowling or any TERF or any gender critical person bullying you or bullying trans-identified people, which you're totally not, writer of this multi-tweet? I can totally tell you're just a sad, scared mama. How are trans-identified people being bullied? This is the thing, too. They just say, get the likes, may or may not be authentic likes, but they get them, and then their stupidity goes viral, their lies go viral, their hate and hate mobbing goes viral on Twitter anyway, and it potentially, I don't know for sure, but I mean, someone really did dox J.K. Rowling, so it potentially, you know, stirs up hatred for the named women, or in this case, well, women, you know, the nameless named women of quote-unquote TERFs, and the named woman that is J.K. Rowling in this multi-tweet, for targeting, for harassment, for actual threats, because she implies she feels women, XX humans need a name, because that's a pretty fucking distinct thing to be in this world, is an XX human, and we need names, like female or woman or girl something, and to say that those names should just be for that group. Like, what is this evil deed she did? Because every time I get an argument, they just broadly label it transphobia, and they never, that I think I started to say and got sidetracked, they just say these things, and then when you question them, they either block you, they never can back it up. It's all, you'll usually just get blocked or ignored. I don't know, and then there's the tweet where this person claims to be a nurse, okay, you know, like, yeah, right, but okay, this mother, this quote-unquote mother, is a quote-unquote nurse, and she's saying she refuses to be lectured in biology, and she says, does sex exist? Of course it does. What do you think her son transitioned to? She doesn't say to, but she meant to. And then she says, I've never seen my... I could scream. And then she says, I've never seen my chromosomes. I don't care to. Yeah, okay. Alright, Millie. But, like, you do. You see the effects of your chromosomes. We all do. We all can distinguish men from women, boys from girls, males from females of our species. You always have been. You always can. whatever you actually are, whether you're a mother or you're a trans-identified male, you walk the streets of wherever you live and you have no trouble 99% of the time distinguishing the men from the women. However not pretty the women are, however beautiful the men are, you have no problem, because our species is dimorphic, two sexes, and then there are intersex cases, but that doesn't mean they're new sexes, does it? And so you're doing this very dishonest thing where you pretend and play dumb, and you like lie about your experience as a human in the world. You have always been able to distinguish the sexes, but now for this cause you're gonna pretend you never could. You never knew what anyone's chromosomes were, so you could never really be sure who was a man and who was a woman you met. Even though if we get to talking in a very normal casual setting, they always reveal, of course they do, they always will say these like random blanket statements about women are and men have always, and what you've never seen anyone's chromosomes, and you've always known who the girls were versus the boys, and you have always had these general observations that could make you say things like girls are always and boys they tend to, because you always knew. We all always knew which sex was which. So this playing dumb thing, and I'm so tempted to say you're not playing, but I know you are. I know you know the difference between a male person and a female person, and you're doing this bullshit lying thing where you're like, I've never even seen my chromosomes, because you never needed to, because chromosomes have physical manifestations in our species. So you know without seeing the chromosomes what chromosome someone has, because males express a certain way and females express a certain way. And you can't just be honest about that, because you need to be manipulative to serve your cause, to vilify J.K. Rowling, to vilify women who care about women, who are actual feminists, and men who are allied with them. Thus, this is what you do. This is your tactic. I notice it now. And then that's the other part that's completely incoherent and hypocritical, where the only people who seem allowed to identify a body to their gender identity is trans people who identify as trans, because cis women aren't allowed to tie female bodies to being female and woman, and I guess cis men aren't allowed to do that either with male bodies, but trans people get to seek validation through physical surgeries and physical and hormonal interventions to make themselves more like the opposite sex. And that completely that opposite sex chasing goal is like valid and fine and celebrated, but cis people are like demonized, especially women are demonized for wanting to tie or just helplessly, or what's the better word, like involuntarily, just like naturally tying a female body to womanhood. That's considered bad, but trans identified people are allowed to do that for themselves, and that's considered good and valid. And then the other part that's insane is like the gender critical people who are saying maybe there's a better therapy out there, maybe there's a self-acceptance therapy. You call that, you call your thing where you convince or go along with your kid wanting to physically change their healthy body to make it match this mental concept they have of themselves. A little redundant, but yes. You say that is fine, but the gender critical people saying that maybe there's a way you could like learn to live with dysphoria and even overcome dysphoria without any physical alterations to your perfectly healthy body, that to you is conversion therapy. Like wanting your kids' body, wanting children's bodies and adults, and you know, a lot of people vary, but in my case, I want children and adults' bodies to remain intact, and I hate the idea of 10 years passing and realizing it was all a mistake, because it's such a natural thing to do. And as someone who has been in a very mentally vulnerable state before, and who has had the most extreme of thoughts about what would make me happy, especially as a teenager, and knowing how volatile that can be, this is just so irresponsible for the medical community to partake in, and for parents to allow that this step happen so young, because there's so much potential for regret, and it's inevitable. And I can imagine so much sunken cost fallacy is going to happen for years before the final revelation of, no, I shouldn't have done this. Kids they have such a extreme and unique way of thinking, and it's like all the adults all around, how do none of you remember what it was like being a teen? Did you just not have these thoughts, so they're just very foreign to you? I don't know, maybe you really didn't, and so to you it's like, oh, I never thought this crazy stuff, so I guess this is the right way to deal with it. But there's gonna be so much regret in 10 years. I hope the lawsuits are massive. I will be rooting for every kid who was medically transitioned. I hope they're just huge. I hope they fucking bankrupt the NHS and America's medical boards and communities as well. I hope so many people are fired. Oh, this is so gross. And then there's this tweet where this quote-unquote mother says, I saw a lesbian TERF argue about how trans women choose to be women whilst girls are forced into child marriage. So by the same token, by campaigning for gay marriage, you were choosing to be married when these girls were forced. And the issue here is that is a very false comparison, because what I imagine this gender critical lesbian was saying was that it's absurd that men can just choose to be a part of the historically oppressed sex, when that's impossible. They can't ever be women, but they can just say the words I am a woman and demand entry into that category and those spaces, while there exists the reality in our world where the fact of existence for girls is that it's not something that they can escape. It's just a factual reality of their birth. That's just what that type of human is called. So when you're born into this world, wherever you're born, the vagina having babies have a name. In English, they're called girls. And so this is acknowledged in countries where child marriage is allowed, and these girls who cannot escape their biology have to be subjected to this horrifying thing of marriage as children. And she was contrasting this, presumably, with how these very privileged men of the world, and I guess, I don't know where this lesbian is from, but she was probably contrasting that with how absurd it is that the men of the world can just declare themselves to now be the oppressed of the world, the oppressed sex of the world, with the simple sentence, with simple whine and demand. That's the point they were making. The need to campaign for the right to marry while gay it shouldn't even be entering this conversation, because she was comparing the reality of femaleness in our world to the fantasy of femaleness in this man's head, where he can just say, I'm a woman, and that's respected and honored. That didn't really have anything to do with the right to marry as a consenting adult. I'm like, of course, gay people have every right to campaign or to fight for marriage and the real right to get married, because like they should be, obviously. That's, being not allowed to do something that straight people are, or that people who want to marry the opposite sex are, is a right being withheld from you. And so fighting for it is to make things equal, is to make things fair. This thing of males having the option to just claim womanhood for themselves is like an example of the height of how unfair life is for women and girls, because they can't do that, as this example of the girls who are made to be child brides exemplifies. They can't escape their femaleness. They can't escape being the oppressed sex. It's observed, and it's the reality of their biology. And so this is why I think this is a man, certainly male identified, because this is just such a hideous misunderstanding or willful misunderstanding, and the lack of empathy in that line and this comparison is just so stupid. It feels like the type of stupidity a man would employ, the type of cluelessness and callousness a man would employ. It could be a woman, but it seems very unlikely. And then they pretend that they used to entertain the reasonable concerns, which I don't believe at all. And then they pretend that they will never forgive themselves for that. Sure. And then they declare that they are a woman, probably a lie, and that they didn't want themselves or their daughters to be harmed while sharing space with men. And then they didn't explain. They were, of course, they were super duper vague and said the thing that changed their mind was that they read and learned and listened. The fuck? What is that? You read what? You learned what? How did you find you were more safe? That all of so you were afraid, and you had these worries about being vulnerable to male predators, and then you read, learned, and listened what to make you not be worried anymore? I'm very curious to know, but you will never answer, of course. And then she says this weird thing: you give an inch and these people take a mile. This is like what racists say. So that was weird. I don't see how it even applies here. You give an inch to gender critical people and they take a mile. In what way? What does that mean for gender critical people? Because that is historically an expression used by whites, and it's a racist thing. Like, you give them a little bit of freedom and they want way more. And it's also been used, I've seen by misogynists, where it's like you give women a few rights and they want more. That's what you give them an inch, they take a mile. So, of course that's not going to be answered or explained any further than this vague nonsense. I read, I learned, I listened. Okay, Millie, sure you did. And then they end that tweet with, they want trans elimination from society. Yep, say the big scary sentences to really rile people up, get them firmly against your enemy, and to see them as the enemy and as evil and bad and heinous, so deserving of all sorts of horrible crimes and harm. This gender critical feminist wants trans-identified people to have seriously entertained alternatives to transition. I want them to be taught to love their bodies and to have that be done with in a meaningful way, in a thoughtful way, by therapists who have, got checked their own sexist and misogynistic biases, so they're not like, oh yeah, that is weird that you are a girl and you don't want to do this and this, and yeah, that is weird that you're a boy and you want to do this and this. That's not my childhood. All the boys did boy things and all the girls, like, therapists have those biases too. It's just unhealthy people, mentally unhealthy people leading mentally unhealthy people is what seems to be the problem. And then greedy, manipulative people making money off of mentally unhealthy and vulnerable people. That's the other part of things, because it's quite a money maker, all of this. And I mean, that doesn't always necessarily mean a thing is bad, but there is a financial motivation to keep it going. So I wouldn't trust it outright. And so this part is curious and is connected to, well, I was sort of criticizing it earlier, and it really tracks for this particular criticism, because, okay, so they say, but okay, I'll just read the whole thing. And truly my heart goes out to these people who detransition. I can't imagine, but I don't know another area of medicine where a small percentage of unsuccessful cases calls for a review of something with such a high success rate. I really don't. I understand that this is complicated, and then it goes on into the next few, but that's not relevant for the point I want to make, which is, I question what they mean, how they're measuring success in this, because you said your daughter has gone through all of the things that they were supposed to, to transition. They did the HRT and they're not even detectable as male anymore. You basically said, and yet you're saying that this kid of yours, just knowing that there are people who still classify him as a male, is making him so insecure that he wants to end things and he can't use the bathroom? Is that part of the success? That kids like your kid can't function normally in society? That they can't handle being considered the opposite sex of what they dream of being, of what they wish they were? That's part of the success? Because I question, how are you measuring success? Are you measuring it by lack of S's committed after the fact? Because, I mean, that is a very seemingly tenuous way to measure success for something like this. You need to know long term how it affects, and it seems that most trans-identified people post these treatments, quote unquote treatments, they still remain pretty depressed. They still have a lot of difficulty functioning, because nothing really, I mean, yes, drastic changes happen to their body, but there's a realization, especially just this thing of getting older, that's natural to getting older, where you realize just the facts of reality, the facts of being, that you aren't actually a man, you aren't actually a woman, is what a lot of them realize, and what a lot of them will realize, I imagine, when they get to a certain age. And so it's just like you've put a band-aid on this thing that when the wound is so deep inside, and instead of treating the deep wound inside, you put a band-aid on your kid's genitals and said, there, you're fixed now. and then you say that's success because they aren't telling you about wanting to end things anymore. Or, I mean, in your case, they are telling you that you are like afraid of them ending things because they've found that not everyone in the world agrees with their self-identity belief. And that to you is success when kids go through that. Okay, I think that you know that that's nonsense and you just didn't think this fly out. But okay, moving on. And then they say maybe we do need to improve services so this doesn't happen to people. And I'm hardly worshiping the NHS gender clinics at the altar. Quite the opposite. I think it's actually ludicrous that they have to wait 4 to 6 years, and they should actually get in sooner. Okay. So this is a mad person, a mad man, a mad woman, I don't know, but they are mad, British mad. In other areas of medicine, that is the thing. You do have to wait several years to like get transplants, certain transplants. So okay, I should have read it. Okay, they go on about having to wait 4 to 6 years for the first appointment. And then they say, imagine that in another area of medicine. I think the flaw in that is the type of treatment they're getting. It's affirmative treatment. It's not questioning treatment. It this person later goes on to say that their quote-unquote daughter, or maybe they, were asked to reconsider their name. Okay, and then asked about if they were molested, and then and then asked if what they thought about anal sex. But that the molestation question, it could be part of the understanding or getting a better sense of your mental health. And if you are perhaps maybe that's the half-assed barrier of making sure you're doing this for the right reasons. I would like to know further context. I would have hoped this person or their kid, it still could be real, would have asked, or the mother would have asked, why do you need to know that? It sounds like a question that's like trying to get a sense of where, perhaps mental traumas you may have endured that would propel you to want this, because there are a number of trans-identified, forget them for a minute. There are a number of detransition people who have talked about their sexual trauma, their sexual abuse trauma, being part of why they wanted to transition. So it kind of does make sense that people in that field would at minimum ask questions like that. The anal sex thing is a little odd. I don't know, it might be part of the gender sick thing of, I don't know if that's just a general wellness thing, or if that was a creepy doctor. I don't know how normal that is. I don't know what that is, or why that is. You would think you would know. You would think you would ask mother why this doctor asked her kid about anal sex. Because the thing I was thinking originally was maybe, I don't know, maybe that's someone who is trying to validate your, if they're like gender sick, they might be trying to validate your identity as female, your mental identity as female, because you like to be the receiver in sex. That's maybe reaching. I'm giving them sort of the benefit of the doubt here, though that's not really, because it's still a gender sick thing to ask. And by gender sick, I just mean the people, which is most people who have been brainwashed by gender roles and gender norms. So even if they try to fight it, even though they don't want it, maybe they still have these subconscious gendered, sexed expectations from each sex. and they still think it's odd, or just recognize it's odd, because technically that's not necessarily bad, but they recognize it's odd and maybe pathologize oddities in gender non-conforming behavior. And for the gender sick therapists or general practitioners, they might link those who are more comfortable with the opposite sex's gender role stereotypes as a sign of them being the opposite sex mentally, which I think is a byproduct of gender sick mental absorption and the brainwashing just being in full effect. But it also seems like something that is just kind of probable and just in most humans, if they're raised in any kind of society where there are expectation differences for each sex, beyond biology, that is. So yeah, it ends with saying that was passed in a report amongst the doctors, and I just don't understand how a mother just let that slide without asking questions. That seems like that's why this seems like the perspective of a young trans-identified male who just didn't have the confidence to ask, why are you asking me this, and rather than the mother of this person. Because you definitely get to go back, even if it's like, okay, they had that experience alone, but then, like, why wouldn't you go back with them and say, why did you ask my kid this stuff? Okay. So I don't think this is a real mother. I don't think this is a real woman. I suspect this is a man. And I could be wrong. I could be very wrong. But I'm going by the senses. This seems like a guy. The thing implied at the end is like, would you? What if you had to? Or else you would be dropped from the service you're accessing to try to save your own life. That's what she had to do. It's like, well, yeah, what is these alternate? I mean, those specific questions are questionable, but you're also seeming to imply that there should be no questions. Like, there have to be some questions to figure out. How can you say it's not perfect, it's complicated, and then like imply that like it should happen even faster? There should be even less of a wait time. There should be even, and I mean, I think the wait time thing is just a byproduct of the NHS, given what I'm an outsider, obviously, but I hear wait times are long for a lot of things, not years long usually, but also I feel like the demand is higher than the supply, I think is what I'm trying to say. There are more people who want to go to gender clinics than there are gender clinics. There's like not enough room in tiny old England to accommodate all of these children, probably, who are demanding this specific service. That's why I've seen like there are so many more gender clinics that have opened up. And then that's the other part too, where in the final tweet that says it's like it's something you have to do to save your own life, because the nature of humans is that we existed without gender-affirming surgeries, quote unquote, and without HRT access for like the vast majority of human history, and people just existed in their actual natural bodies. And it doesn't seem right or instinctual that now that it exists, people can't live without it when they lived without it for most of human existence. It's like, because we're not talking about a sickness, because I know that's what they'll do next is say, oh, well, cancer patients didn't have treatments, but this is not cancer. This is not something malignant in your body. This is just you existing as your sex. And people were existing in their healthy bodies and as their sex for all of human history until very recently. Pretty recently. And so it seems like this is part of the thing I was saying earlier, where people now are like, they learned the coping mechanism is to not cope and is to end things, to have this very dramatic response, or at least threaten to have this very dramatic response to not getting their way in this specific way, to not having this fantasy fulfilled of being the opposite sex or being treated or seen as the opposite sex, and to deal with that by essentially not dealing with it and leaving the world, which is absurd to me, which is so obviously bad and so obviously new, because this was not how people coped before. Even people with gender dysphoria 10 plus years ago, and they weren't threatening us like this. They didn't need this to save their life. They dealt with being their sex. And it's just, it all feels very new in a bad way, where the youth have been severely manipulated. It's almost like the natural end result of sexism not being abolished or not being dealt with is this extreme reaction, or this extreme way of coping. So it's like, I can't beat them, so I guess I'll join them. I can't change, how fetishized female existence is, say the female, so I guess I'll join the males, see what it's like on that side. And for the males, it's like, well, I guess I can't ever be someone's sex slave as a man. That's not sexy. But I can really get really close to it as a woman, as a trans woman. That's, yeah, some of them. I don't want to say they're all AGPs, but it seems like a significant number of them are AGPs. But like for the males who aren't, it's the same situations. Like, I can't be free to just be like pretty and happy in colors and hair flipping and dress wearing as a man, as a boy. So I'm gonna just join the other side and do it, because I don't want to be in a fight every day of like having to explain, yes, I am a man, yes, I am wearing a dress, but I am a man. I don't want my dress to be a political statement. So I'll just path of slightly less resistance, because yes, I know trans-identified people still face resistance as trans-identified people, but it seems like it's actually less resistance than GNC people face. So yeah, I just wanted to say all that. Didn't know it would take this long, but I did think it would take over an hour, so here we are. And yeah, I wanted to, because I responded to people in that thread. I was going to read those. I'll read one. Someone said, all that work, setting up a charity, organizations, and writing books, and this is actually your biggest, most lasting impact on young people. Hope you're proud. That was at J.K. Rowling. And also a response to MillieCorner's multi tweet. And I responded saying, but with a typo, which I hate when I look back and there's like a typo, but I'm gonna say what I meant. Any woman fighting to protect women and girls should be proud. Sexists like you encouraging boys to consider themselves girls for not connecting to male stereotypes and prioritizing male feelings over female needs should be ashamed. But you're not smart enough to be ashamed. And my typo is I wrote protecting instead of protect. But yeah. But yes, that's how to respond to that. I just get like triggered, I guess, whenever I see anything part of that. When I see anything that falls under vilifying a woman disproportionately. Like calling, so all of J.K. Rowling's like charity and her goodness and her her compassion and her how she's stood with or stood up against anti-Semitism and just all of her activism and goodness, her overwhelming goodness gets thrown right into the trash to be reframed, relabeled an evil person, the worst type of person. Apparently, some I've even seen say she's worse than a Nazi, because at least Nazis love something. That's what I saw the other day. Oh, God, these people are so vile, ironically, because they call everyone else vile. But yes, so it just, any kind of reframing of a woman as just the worst kind of person, so like evil category, or changing, like altering what she is to make her something so much worse. Again, they do this with Meghan Markle a lot. Like, you just see old interviews, which I saw pre her tie to Harry, because I watched Suits, so I went on a dive for all the cast, watching their interviews, and she was the most interesting to me of the cast, and she was so just charming and likable and a feminist, so that was cool. And then to see that, and just to see people reframe her as this evil person, they actually, when she looked to the left that one time, that was actually a sign of narcissism, and she's actually always been a narcissist. That really gets my goat. That makes me so, it's such a consistent thing done to women specifically. And so it's definitely happening to Rowling. It's everywhere all the time in lefty spaces. So it's a little disheartening, but they can't quit, because, as long as they are out there screaming at the top of their lungs, angry, wanting to smash our heads in with bats, because we say women are distinct from men and they need a name and we should just keep it woman, and us saying that makes us evil, and anyone saying that makes them evil. We have to keep saying it, because it's just so crazy that I feel like I woke up in a gosh darn nightmare, because little GNC me would just be horrified at what 2022 is and these insane arguments. And so that version of me is even horrified at what Sean and Lindsay Ellis and even ContraPoints I discovered a little later, but it spiraled for all of them. I thought, you're all smart. There's no way you're going to come to this conclusion that what I say, what Rowling says, what gender critical people say is not just not reasonable, but it's evil. There's no way. But they did. They all did. I think, yes, ContraPoints in the I forget which video, the canceling video, I think. He likens gender critical people, aka he calls them TERFs, to Nazis. So I'm used to it now, but it's still quite mind blowing, and sad doesn't begin to describe it. It's just next level. It's just crazy. I feel like I'm in a hell on earth. It's just Like, this is a very clever way. This is like top-notch hell. You think hell's gonna be all flames and fire, but it's like, no, this like slow burn of all of my faves coming out one by one as misogynists is like, yeah. But then there's Rowling, because like I thought, I adored her. I was one of the people who made a thank you J.K. Rowling video for her, like, I think in 2012. Yeah, and that was a thing where we just thanked her for Harry Potter. A bunch of YouTubers did. And she was like on the, like, I don't know what a word for this, maybe the subconscious list in my mind of women who are just like, who would be like heartbreaking when they finally came out as a TWAW type, because like, you know, the more I realized what I felt about it, the more it like hurt when I would discover people come out so angrily and without any kind of understanding about why women would still need a name and their own spaces. Like Kimya Dawson was one. I adored Kimya Dawson, and she came out as a she straight up said fuck TERFs, and I was like, that was like heartbreaking. She was on the list of like people who I would actually really care about saying stuff like that. So Rowling was on the list, and she's like one of the very few on the list who like was like, actually I think they actually have a point, kind of thing. And I was like, I was emotional, I'll say that. It was like shocking, because she was like up there in people I admire, because overwhelmingly everyone else I admire or liked, just one by one, they all stated at some point that they don't value women's rights or protections, and they are an unwitting sort of misogynist. Yeah. So I've talked enough. My throat definitely hurts and is dry, and so I should go now. Thank you for listening and watching and maybe reading along, because I will probably post screenshots of all these tweets as I read them and then go over them, and I appreciate your view and patience, and yeah, have a happy day and week, and hopefully I will figure out another thing to do a video about in a timely manner. I wanted to do this my next video before the latter half of April, and I really pushing it really pushing it. So yeah, again, thank you for listening, and have a lovely day. Goodbye.